Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I am, of course, your host, David, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Glowface Digital Wellbeing podcast. I hope you've enjoyed some of the previous week's conversations and ideas, and this week we are going to continue to explore some of the different ways in which technology and screens are impacting our lives and changing a variety of different parts of our existence. Now, today's episode is about how screens and how technology, is making us think in shallow ways. And so it's sort of the idea is around comparing shallow thinking versus deep thinking. And to explore this idea, I want to take a step back and get into the concept of neuroplasticity, which some people may be familiar with, some people not. But what it is the idea that our brains are malleable, can be molded and changed in different ways. And so for a long time in neuroscience, it was thought that, by the time you got into your 20s and 30s, that your brain was effectively set in stone. An old dog can't learn new tricks. That what you'd learned by the time you were 30 and how your brain looked and the shape of your brain was set in stone. It couldn't change, and there was not much you could do about that. Where in the last 50 years, neuroscientists have come to understand the exact opposite, where our brains are very plastic, which means that they're easily malleable, they're easy to change, and very easy to rewire. So your brain has a lot of neural connections and neural pathways that it sends electrical signals across, effectively sending information through your brain into your body, so your body can go to work and do things that it needs to be done. And so what happens in the brain is that if you start to do something new, or you start to try a new experience, your brain starts to form new neural pathways. And that means is that the more that these neural pathways are used, the better that they get. And that means that, like, literally the shape of your brain gets changed by doing new things. Think about learning a new instrument, learning how to do something new, learning a new subject. Your brain, the structure of it at a microscopic level is actually changing. Now, it does get a little bit harder as you do get older. It tends to be that kids' brains are more plastic than older people's, but that does not mean that you can't rewire or reshape the brain of an adult in any means. A study was done back in the late thousands, I think it was about 2007, that sort of demonstrated the plasticity of the brain, and it was in the context of internet usage. And what the researchers did is they found, I think it was 7 people who were what they call experienced internet users, and they found another 7 who were not. And what they did is and I'm not sure how they found 7 people who were not experienced in the internet. I'm not sure if you could find that in 2023 in a Western society. But they got those 7 novice users to use the internet for 1 hour every day for just a week. And they did some scans before and after this process. So they'd use a functional MRI machine where they could see the activity in the brain whilst they were doing something, and that was whilst they were searching the net. And what happened just within 1 week is that the brains of the novice users, by the end of the week, resembled the activity in the brains of the experienced users when they'd first done the scans at the start of the week on those experienced users. And what that means is that the brains of those novice users had developed, just within a week, new neural pathways. And what this study is also a great example of, not just neuroplasticity, but how dramatic the change can be from using technology and using screens. And it's, given how easy it is to use these devices and how, intuitive they've become. We're not just talking about the internet these days for 1 hour or just for 1 week. We're talking about several hours every day that these devices are shaping the way in which our brains think and the way in which our brains operate. And the question then becomes, so what shape are these devices encouraging our brains to take? And really, when you think about the nature of these devices, they tend to promote fragmented attention. They tend to promote engagement with multiple things at once. You're jumping between applications, you're jumping between, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You're looking at messages, you're replying to emails, you're checking the weather. You put it down for a minute, you pick it up again 1 minute later. You tend to engage with these devices in a pretty fragmented sort of way. They tend to pull your attention in multiple different directions. So what does this mean? Well, that means it becomes quite difficult to focus on one thing for a long period of time and really get to the bottom of an issue or really come to understand the issue for yourself. We tend to read in headlines, a lot of news articles these days on the internet, give readers, single sentence summaries at the top of the news article for those people who don't want to spend the whole time reading the news article. We're being taught to digest information in bite-sized pieces and getting in as much information as we possibly can through these devices. And so that tends to promote engagement with ideas in a pretty, what you'd call, shallow way. We spend a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes on an idea, we form an opinion, and we move on to something else. And we're pretty easily convinced because we get shown content from people we trust. That's what, that's how we stay engaged with these devices. And so we, read something from someone we trust and we take it at face value and we move on to the next thing and we form these fairly strong opinions based upon very, admittedly, a small level of engagement with ideas. So we tend to, engage with these things in a shallow way, and that's almost a natural inclination for our bodies as well. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I can't say his last name right, but if you look up the book Thinking Fast and Slow, you'll find the author. He has this whole idea that there's really two ways of thinking in our brain. One being system one and the other being system two. Now system one, and I'm going to butcher this explanation, but effectively it's the fast thinking part of your brain, the brain that reacts to situations very quickly, and the part of the brain that it just spends brief moments on ideas. System two is when you sort of pause and stop and think and have to engage with an idea long enough that you pay attention to it and you come to understand it. And what he actually says is that system one doesn't really require a lot of effort and energy. It's that sort of our natural state. And system two does. He actually refers to a pretty famous study done on some judges in Israel, and there were parole judges reviewing parole. And I think there was, sort of, let's say about 10 parole judges. I don't think it was many. But what they found with these parole judges is they reviewed parole applications as it tended to get towards lunchtime, that whether or not they approved the parole application of the individual tended to decrease as it got towards lunchtime, effectively as they got hungrier, because they needed energy, they needed calories to use their system two thought processes to engage with the parole application. So actually by the time they got to just the last application before lunch, the percentage of applications approved was zero. Simply because they didn't have the effort and energy left in them to engage properly with the application. So the easy answer was to default the application to denied. So it's a really great example of what we tend towards naturally is this sort of easy system one thinking. And that's definitely what our devices encourage us to do, is engage with system one thinking. Now, what is so we're sort of seeing here, okay, one, our brains are very plastic, means they're easily malleable. Two, our devices tend to make us think in shallow and quick ways. And so we're sort of being molded into thinking in shallow and quick ways. And through it, we actually have natural inclinations to do this as well. So it's sort of a double whammy. It's like a two-punch combo, the device and naturally what we tend to do as well. So what's the other side of the story? Well, the other side of the story is this idea around, deep thinking, or let's call it, depth, or you can use any of those sort of ideas, but we'll use that sort of phrase, that terminology around deep thinking. And this is, like I've kind of explained a little bit already, the idea that you sit with an issue and you think about it for a long time, long enough that you get to form your opinion about it in such a way that is grounded in, I'd say, knowledge rather than in information. And that's an important distinction. We live in a world of information. We don't necessarily live in a world where there's a lot of knowledge around, or knowledge being accessed by people. And so deep thinking, a great example of deep thinking is the concept of flow. Now, flow was introduced by a psychologist. Again, these guys have some funky names. Millay, I'm not going to even say it, but look up the book Flow. His first name is Millay, Milhay, I believe. And the whole idea around flow is that is this state of work where you get to enter into that allows you to engage with an idea in such a way that it almost feels like time is moving at a faster pace, and you're not concerned about anything else except with that problem at hand. And it's quite difficult to enter into a state of flow because, one, the task has to be difficult enough to be engaging for you. So if it's too easy, you'll get bored and you'll move on. You won't get into a state of flow. But if it's too hard, you'll get frustrated and you won't pursue the task. It has to be this sort of balance between matching your level of skill with the level of difficulty of the task. But once you're in a state of flow, you tend to produce work that is really beneficial, that is creative, that is new, and that adds value. And I think that's really what this comes down to, is that when you think in a deep way, when you go into states of flow, another author, Cal Newport, talks about this in his book Deep Work, around, if you do deep work, you emerge from deep work having produced something that is of increased value. And this is really the key I think I want to get across in this podcast, is that we have this way of thinking enabled by our devices and by technology and naturally by ourselves, that when we think in shallow thoughts, we think in terms of information, in terms of headlines, and that really doesn't add a lot of value to ourselves or to the world around us. But when we start to think in ways that are deep, when we start to get into states of flow, when we start to enter into states of deep work where we pay attention on one task for a long period of time, and we emerge from these engagements with these ideas, with these tasks, with knowledge, and really having spent a sufficient amount of time to come to understand them in a way that allows real depth in our understanding, and allows us to be more confident in our opinions or our thoughts on these, but it also allows our opinions and thoughts to be more challenged, I think, in a better way. That the fact we're willing to spend time with an idea means that we want it to be better, we want it to be challenged ultimately, and we want it to be refined in the long run. So I just want to encourage you to find some ways in your life to, engage with deep thinking. Reading a book is a great way to do that. Listening to podcasts. These are also really great examples of thinking deep, because you're engaging with an idea for a long period of time, not in bite-sized pieces. But just know that when you use your device on a regular basis, it is actually literally changing the way your brain thinks and operates. And it's important that when you start putting the device down, your brain actually starts to change back. And when you start to engage with things in a deep way, when you pay attention to one task for a long period of time, your brain actually gets better at doing that. And so the more you engage with deep work, the more you engage with one task for a long period of time, the better you get at it. The more you enter in states of flow, the better you get at it. Flow is actually called, the optimal experience by the author. And it's a fantastic place to be when you get into a state of flow. So I encourage you, find some things in your life to enter into states of flow, find some ways to do some deep work and, really get to depth knowledge in your thinking, rather than always processing ideas in bite-sized information like our devices tend to encourage us to do. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. We'll be back again next week with some more ideas around screens and technology.